two guys force their heartbroken best friend to join them in a LARP event to cheer him up. However, they conjure a demon by mistake and must do everything they can to defeat it. In the 16th century, a mystic named John Dee wrote a book called the Siglum Ameth that was supposed to summon angels using musical chants, but instead brought forth demons. Fearful of his song's powers, Dee tried to destroy his tome but failed. Soon, sorcerers and dark lords searched for it, but the book remained lost for centuries. In the present, a group of friends are participating in a live-action roleplay or LARP ritual in a forest, but they stop and bicker among themselves when Ronnie sees that their sacrifice has failed because Eric didn't put his heart into it. However, the latter whips out a book from his satchel, claiming he has another magic trick up his sleeve when paintballers suddenly appear and attack them. The team quickly flees, and the paintballers discover they left the book behind. They attempt to tear it apart when the tome attacks one of them. His teammate manages to fling it away, but as the book disappears, the paintballers stare in shock when they see that the text imprinted onto the man's face. Elsewhere, Eric realizes he dropped his book and throws a tantrum. However, the tome reappears in the van, and Hung hands it to Eric, who immediately calms down. The following day at work, Joe Revitt and his coworker Gilberto are playing doom metal music, but their manager tells them to stop, threatening to fire the former. Joe informs Gilberto that he wrote that song to propose to his girlfriend Beth, and is excited to play it for her. However, Beth pulls Joe aside and breaks up with him, claiming she has to focus on her career and surround herself with more successful people. Furious, Joe rushes home and accidentally drives over Hung's mace. Joe is unfazed and immediately goes to his room, where he plays a power ballad. Realizing something is wrong, the two approach their housemate and deduce that Beth broke up with him. Joe ponders on Beth's words and thinks he should move out, but Eric stops him. The two then offer Joe illegal substances to smoke and a drink to lift his spirits. Soon, the intoxicated Joe crashes and hallucinates Beth. The next day, Joe awakens inside their van and discovers that the pair brought him to a fantasy LARP event. He angrily shouts at the two, who inform him they're in the Eliphaz kingdom. Infuriated, Joe attempts to remove his armor, but Eric stops him, as they still have to fight for the Cabedra army. Elsewhere, Ronnie, the game master, inspects a map brought to him. He then instructs one of his team members, his dragon rider, to prep their vehicle, the dragon. Ronnie then shows his group the different areas of the map. Afterward, they arrive at the Novum Castellum, where Ronnie tells them that all the heroes are required to undergo a Class 3 quest that night, and reiterates that as Game Master, he'll be presiding over everything. Suddenly, Ronnie sees Gwen and her companion pass by and chases after them. Ronnie tries to convince Gwen to be his assistant Game Master and touches her shoulder. Gunther immediately steps in and grabs his hand, until Gwen signals him to stop. They walk off, leaving an embarrassed Ronnie behind. Elsewhere, Joe is surprised that his two friends are using steel weapons instead of foam ones. He then demands the car key so he can leave, but Eric tells him to pretend it's a D&D game. However, Joe says it's been a while since he last played the game, so Eric reminds him that he's a legend, and that people still remember him giving Ronnie's paladin demonic syphilis. The three reminisce about Ronnie getting excited over a succubus in a monster manual, when Hung shares that Eric is about to become a grand sorcerer. Seeing that his friends look cool in their costumes, Joe agrees to join the event. Ronnie then leads his team to the fields of Evermore and hands Travis an ape costume, who storms off. Hurt, he's reduced to wearing a ridiculous attire despite being a trained actor. Eric approaches Ronnie and informs him that Joe has returned to replace Reginald, much to the latter's dismay. In retaliation, Ronnie wants Eric to accomplish a level 12 summoning spell to allow Joe into the game. Later, the hero guilds assemble and are reminded that they must complete their quests before the Battle of Evermore. Elsewhere, Hung prepares for the event by consuming a packet of illegal substances and stretching. He then tells Joe the rundown of the event and teaches him the LARP combat rules. However, Joe gets distracted when he sees Gwen, so Hung finishes him off at her insistence. As Gwen leaves, the embarrassed Joe is about to attack Hung, who stops him as their fights are based on the honor system. Eric returns and hands Joe foam weapons, since beginners aren't allowed swords. Eric then makes Joe sit inside a pentagram that Hung drew, that'll enable the latter to join the game when Lando tries to stop them. However, Eric tells him it's written in the book and shows it to the latter. Joe then spots Gwen and Gunther arriving. Eric assures him they're part of their team and begins his spell. As Eric recites the passage, Joe notices the grimoire's gem glowing and sees a succubus resembling Beth in the sky. When Eric finishes the spell, Joe tells him what he saw, but the former brushes him off, claiming he sees a warrior who can't let go of his past. Eric grabs a fallen picture of Joe and Beth at prom and gives it to Hung, who immediately eats it so Joe can get closure. A shocked Ronnie runs towards them and admonishes Eric for using fireworks, since he isn't a level 27 sorcerer. Ronnie then leads the group away, just as the succubus emerges from the woods. Meanwhile, Eric introduces Joe to the rest of their comrades when they disturb a demon ape nest and are attacked. Hung is struck down by one of the beasts, and the team fights them as a confused Joe looks on. Eric screams for him to help them, so Hung throws Joe his steel sword, which he uses to hit one of the monsters. Ronnie sees him using an unauthorized weapon and makes him sit down. Elsewhere, a lost Travis runs into the succubus, who seduces him. She pushes Travis against the tree to disarm him, then breaks his jaw, ending his life. After Eric regenerates Hung, he tosses lightning bolts at the beasts. Then the great ape arrives. He attacks Lando, but Gunther manages to defeat it. Ronnie then informs the party that they have to loot the Syrinx temple before joining the Evermore battle. Lando suggests they split up to cover more ground, and takes Hung with him. Eric then instructs Joe to return to Eliphaz to get the Koken amulet from their car, because they'll need it in battle. Gwen volunteers to accompany him and leads the way back to the parking lot. At the parking space, the announcer tells all the teams to head to the battlefield to camp for the night after they complete their quests, and to stay vigilant of paintballers. Elsewhere, the succubus attacks an elf, who mistakes her for a vampire LARPer and rips his heart out from his chest. Meanwhile, Gwen tells Joe that she noticed he was enjoying the game earlier, and mentions that her cousin Gunther believes that the LARP event is an actual fantasy world. However, she's forced to accompany him on these events after Gunther sent a player to the hospital. The two are then ambushed, but Gwen easily subdues the two assailants. After failing to kill their leader, since he used a protection spell, Joe banishes him to the Netherrealm. Elsewhere, a couple in a sprite group bickers, and the woman storms off. The succubus finds her wandering alone and appears before her, suggesting they stick together. As the two make out, the succubus murders her. Later, Ronnie, Lando, and Hung arrive at the exalted township of Valinor, where they run into the succubus. Ronnie and Lando are concerned for her, thinking she's injured, but Hung isn't, as he's able to see her true form due to the substances he ingested earlier. Hung then tries to attack her, but she flings him away and briefly reveals her true form. Ronnie quickly flees, while Lando attempts to help Hung, but the succubus blocks his way. However, Hung stabs her in the leg, allowing Lando to run inside the restroom. The furious succubus kills Hung and eats his heart, while a scared Lando watches their silhouettes from inside. The monster then finds Joe and Beth's picture inside Hung's stomach, just as Lando accidentally flushes a toilet, giving away his location. The succubus enters the restroom and checks the cubicles individually, where she sees Lando jumping from the ceiling. As Lando tries to escape, the succubus throws a knife and kills him. Later, Joe and Gwen arrive by the restroom and find Hung's corpse. They hear a noise from inside, so they decide to check, but someone knocks Joe unconscious. The latter then dreams about the succubus, but quickly wakes from Gunther's choking. Gwen pushes him off, but her cousin is convinced that evil has befallen him. Eric covers Hung's body with a cloth while Joe goes inside the restroom to investigate, where he finds Lando's corpse. He goes back outside and says he wants to find Ronnie, believing he killed the two in their quest for authenticity. Gunther deduces that Eric's grimoire summoned something evil in the pentagram, and thinks Joe is now unholy. However, Gwen tells him it isn't Joe's fault, and they need to leave, but Gunther wishes to avenge his two fallen comrades. Eric suggests they go back to camp, arm themselves with steel weapons, and call for reinforcements. Elsewhere, a scared Ronnie is running through the woods and trips. He then realizes that Eric summoned the succubus and plans to warn him, but he sees that the map that his companion made him isn't accurate. The party then arrives at the parking lot, where Eric tries to convince them they should leave to get help. However, Gunther refuses because he wants to avenge his companion's deaths. So with no choice, Eric shows him the armaments. As Joe is searching for his phone, a random LARPer arrives. He informs them that they can't contact 911 because it routes all calls to the Sky Valley Sheriff directly. Gwen explains to the officer what happened, but it turns out the cops are the paintballers that attacked Eric's party days earlier in the forest. The LARPer informs the group that the rest of the teams have already camped out for the night, but Gunther runs back to fight the evil at its source. Gwen asks the LARPer where the nearest battlefield is, and the latter informs her it's through the forest. Gwen then grabs some weapons and chases after her cousin, while Joe and Eric follow her. They then find the succubus feasting on a player, and Joe sees that it's Beth. Shocked, he reaches out to her, but Gwen stabs the demon and pins her to the tree. The succubus then repeats what Eric told Joe at the pentagram, reciting how he saw a warrior who can't let go of his past. Joe realizes that Eric summoned her using the prom photo he had on his person, and Gwen pleads with the enchanter to use the book to send her back. However, Eric doesn't know how because he just picked a random page earlier. Then, they see that the succubus was able to free herself. Eric then sings a random spell aloud, and the succubus starts writhing and flees. Believing it's been mortally wounded, Eric rejoices, but Joe is skeptical. Ronnie then runs into them and sees that Eric has the famed Siglum Ameth in his possession. Eric tries to argue that the words are gibberish, but Ronnie tells him it's a real language called Enochian. Realizing Eric recited a different spell, Ronnie reprimands him, saying he made matters worse because he didn't injure the demon, but instead made it more powerful. Elsewhere, the succubus transforms into an enormous monster and roars. At the camp, two LARPers are awakened by the sound and quickly get up to start the Battle of Evermore, believing they overslept. The party then hears the war horn blaring, and Joe realizes that everyone on the battlefield is carrying foam weapons. He wishes to help them, but Eric tries to dissuade him, saying it's a real demon. However, Joe encourages him to fight and avenge Hung. Moved, the rest of the party returns to Eric's van and arm themselves with weapons. Later, the hero guilds assemble, with each leader giving them a rousing speech before the fight. Ronnie's men then sound a shofar to signal the start of the Battle of Evermore. Elsewhere, Gunther hears the sound and understands that the fight has begun. Meanwhile, the Abominog makes its way to the battlefield. At the event, they release Ronnie's dragon to give the players more experience points if they vanquish it. However, the party also hears another sinister roar from a distance. The paintballers then ambush the LARPers and shoot at them, but the players retaliate. Suddenly, the Abominog arrives and slaughters everyone in sight. The monster also destroys the dragon and devours the people operating it. Horrified, the announcers scream, giving away their location. The beast makes its way towards them and decapitates them. Later, the party arrives and is shocked to see most of the LARPers dead. Ronnie enters a truck to start it, while the rest wait outside and stand guard. Joe then asks Gwen to go to a show with him if they survive the fight, and the latter agrees, kissing him. Eric overhears this and wants to come with them. Elsewhere, the Abominog is about to attack Johnny when Gunther saves him by throwing a spear at it. However, the creature goes the other way when the party calls its attention. Gunther then sees the decapitated paintballer's head with the Enochian texts. Joe, Eric, and Gwen confront the beast as Ronnie struggles to turn on the vehicle. He orders Eric to look for the spell to destroy it, saying he already marked the page earlier. Ronnie then manages to turn on the truck and drives backward to pin the Abominog in place for Gunther to stab it. As Eric recites the spell, Joe and Gwen attempt to take the monster down with a flamethrower. However, the beast just spews fire back at them. Eric tries to save them by shielding them with a grimoire, but the book burns in the process. Ronnie quickly exits the vehicle to extinguish Eric, while Gwen enters the truck to continue pinning the demon. Ronnie explains that all they need is the mystical gem from the book spine since that's the source of its power, but he realizes they need a banishment spell to kill the creature. Gunther then grabs the paintballer's head and hands it over to Ronnie because his face contains the banishment spell. As Ronnie recites the spell, the truck suddenly loses power, freeing the monster. It then kills Ronnie, so Joe grabs the gem from him. Joe then instructs Eric to play his CD before getting on top of the truck to sing while brandishing the gem and attack the creature. A spectral version of Hung then drops from the sky, slays the monster, and disappears. 6 months later, Joe has finally moved on from Beth and starts a doom metal band with Gwen. both promising never to LARP again. Having faced a real demon, Gunther's belief that he's an actual warrior is further reinforced. Ronnie is posthumously recognized as a game master extraordinaire. Eric has become a 27-level sorcerer and is learning Enochian, while Hung's battle against the Abominog is now immortalized as legend.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.